Who wants to talk about gear? I mean, talking about gear is so boring. All of the hiking gurus, Darwin on the Trail, and Dixie with Homemade Wanderlust, Dan Becker, and even Steven from My Life Outdoors. I mean, it seems like for every one hiking video they do 15 gear videos. I just am not that interested in talking about gear. I can't be the only one. You know, gear is totally subjective. It's like sitting around asking each other what your favorite color is, you know? I mean, who gives a shit? I have gotten a lot of questions on trail. If I've ever met you on trail, you know I'm an extrovert. I like to talk. Try to get me to stop talking. Good luck. It's not gonna happen. But one thing I'm not that interested in is talking about gear, because I feel like, I don't know, I'm just not really into the whole consumerism driven society where we gotta buy the next best thing. I'm more of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. I guess I'm becoming a little bit old school, but the one question I've gotten a lot of is, you know, hey Moon Juice, how come you don't have a single wall Dyneema composite tent? You can shave off some weight from your pack, which is absolutely true. I could easily drop a pound of weight by buying a single wall Dyneema tent versus the double wall semi-freestanding solo ultralight tents that I have been using. Let me tell you, I've got a bunch of reasons why I'm never going to use a single wall tent. Reason number one is condensation. Now out here in Arizona, condensation is really not a huge deal. It doesn't happen that often down here in the desert part of the state anyway. But if you do get condensation and you have a single wall tent with a traditional peak pitch, the condensation that builds up on the inside of your tent will run down to the floor of your tent and eventually soak your sleeping bag. And the toe box of your bag is sopping wet. I mean, let's face it, the toe of your sleeping bag usually touches the inside of your tent, especially if you pitch your tent with your head slightly uphill over your toe. The toe box of your sleeping bag is gonna get sopping wet. There's nothing that sounds worse to me than getting into your tent after a long day of hiking and your sleeping bag is wet. Oh my gosh. Yeah, imagine that. I mean, if it's a humid or cloudy day, you're not gonna dry your sleeping bag off. That means the inside of your tent is sopping wet, your sleeping bag is sopping wet. Oh, what a disaster. Oh, I'd hate that. I mean, for that reason alone, I wouldn't buy a single wall tent. Reason number two, with a double wall tent, you have the option of removing your Rainfly. I love to camp just like this without a Rainfly on, so I can see the stars at night. It's one of the best things about camping, especially in an area where there's not a lot of light pollution. The stars and the moon, it's just awesome. And it even looks good through the mesh. Fully exhausted, laying on in my tent and seeing, you know, the universe. The moon looks fantastic and stars. You can see satellites going by. Even in that fine mesh in your tent, there's so much to look at, and it's one of my favorite parts of backpacking is being able to get out where there's no light pollution and just enjoy the size and scope of the universe. It's wild. It's awesome. It's totally awesome. And not to mention, I love, if it's cold, I love to make a cup of coffee, watch the sunrise while I'm still nestled in my super warm sleeping bag. I mean, that's a fun experience. I can't get enough of that. You can't see that with the single wall tent. You're just staring at a tent. You might as well be at home, you know? Number three, wind.
It's 2:15 in the morning. I feel like I've got maybe an hour of sleep. Looking forward to the morning.
I don't know if you've ever tried to sleep on a windy night. If you've got your Rainfly up and it is just flapping away, the best thing to do if you have a double wall tent is to take the Rainfly off. The wind will blow right through the mesh of your tent, as long as you don't freeze to death. But that's the solution. Now, if you have a single wall tent, you obviously can't do that. It's flappy, flappy, flap all night long, you know. Reason number four, I mentioned this before, a double wall tent is semi-freestanding, assuming you have tent poles. Most of the single wall Dyneema composite tents use trekking poles as a setup. I've broken 3 different trekking poles, including the last long trip I took, the lowest to highest route. I broke a trekking pole on day 3. Now, if I had to set up a tent that required 2 trekking poles, I don't know what sort of jimmy rigging I would have to do, but I would have to come up with some sort of MacGyvered way to get my tent set up. And you know, when you're hiking sun up till sundown, the last thing you want to do is fiddle fart around with figuring out how to make your tent work. Number 5. A semi-freestanding tent can save you if you find yourself in a position where you're on solid rock. It's happened to me a couple of times, didn't really think much of it. I just didn't stake my tent down. Just crawl in, lay down, everything's fine. If you have a single wall tent that requires guy lines to be staked down, what are you gonna do if you can't get your stakes in the ground? If there's not, you know, lots of loose rocks around too, it's just a pain in the butt. That doesn't come up very often, but it is a valid point. And it, you know, if you're put in a position where you absolutely have to stake your tent down, that will limit the places where you're able to stop for the night. Might force you to have to hike further than you really want to in order to find a better spot for your tent. Well, that brings me to a 6th reason. Man, there might be 7 reasons why I'm not doing this. And that is the footprint. A double wall tent typically has a much smaller footprint. And there's been multiple times where I've been able to pitch my tent only because I had a very small footprint on, you know, a one-man tent. And you know, on the Colorado Trail, I spent some time with my buddy Levi, who I gave the trail name of Square Feet to because of that very reason. He had a really cool tent, a Durston tent, which actually is a really nice tent for the cost. But it had a massive vestibule space. It required almost twice the amount of space that my tent required in order to find a place to pitch it. And one night in particular, we had a hard time finding space for both of us. And you know, when the sun starts to set and you're tired, oh man, panic starts to set in. It's nice to be able to only require a small sliver of space to get set up. Could be the 6th reason, or the 7th reason is pretty obvious, and that's cost. You know, $700, $800, $1,000 for a single wall tent is just kind of crazy when really good ultra lightweight double wall tents cost $200, $260. I think the Big Agnes Tiger Wall that I have costs $279 maybe. And you know, when you put all of those things together, I've got 6 or 7 really solid reasons where I'll be honest with you, even if somebody gave me a single wall tent, I'm never using it. I just can't, it's just not practical for me. So again, this is a gear discussion. So all these reasons why I'm not interested in a single wall tent might not make any sense to you. And maybe that £1.50 or a variety of other reasons that, you know, that make a single wall tent appealing to you, you know, would contradict everything that I'm thinking. But listen, this is why gear is subjective and why it's such a strange conversation to have. And I honestly don't know why people are so interested in having it. Join me next time where I'm not talking about gear. I will be hiking, I promise you that. Oh man, talking about gear sucks. Oh man, I just can't wait to go hike. I don't want to sit around talking about gear. I got a mountain to go up here. Let's go.